Good evening, everyone in the UK. It's 11 in the morning here, but it is actually pub opening time in England. But these unfortunate authors have joined me from their homes rather than, well, I shouldn't assume that. Is any of you actually in a pub?
Oh, no.
No. All right, so here we all boringly at home. But anyway, we are here to talk about Many Deadly Returns. Let me hold up this really handsome book, which are 21 stories celebrating 21 years of the Murder Squad. And I'm going to ask Margaret Murphy, who wrote the foreword, to give us a brief history of the Murder Squad and how it came to be. I thought that between you and Martin, you really made a wonderful journey back to the past and brought us forward about how successful the Murder Squad has been. So Margaret.
And it has been quite stunning, actually, Barbara, because all those years ago, 21, it was more than 21, because obviously we had to plan all of this and plot all of it. It was an idea that we didn't know whether it would succeed or whether we would continue with it. It was completely an idea which I just thought I would try, because I'd been really frustrated. I'd had a conversation with an editor who had said, look, your books are really well reviewed, but we can't understand why they're not actually making the sales that we would anticipate. And I said, well, isn't that your job? I write the books, hopefully get good reviews, and then you work on that and build on that using your marketing team and your budgets and all the rest of it. And she said, well, it doesn't work like that, which was quite brave, really, considering she was talking to someone who professionally designs ways to kill people, So, but I realized there was just no point in trying to battle against that. There was no argument against it. I mean, even at that time, and it's still true today, that about 70% of the publisher's spend goes on 10% of authors, and the rest just have to kind of scrabble for the rest. So I knew people through the Crime Writers Association, and the Northern Crime Writers had a particularly strong chapter, and there were people in that chapter whose work I really admired and I thought I could work with, and that's very important because it has been a very collaborative exercise right from the start. So I approached those people, and 3 of them are here today: Anne Cleeves, Martin Edwards, and Cath Staincliffe. And 3 others were Chas Brenchley, who is now working in the United States and writing quite different books, John Baker, who has since retired, and sadly Stuart Pawson, who sadly died a few years ago. But those people, their work excited me. I knew I would like to work with them, and thankfully they all said yes. So we didn't really know what we were going to do, but we launched in with ideas about a website, and that was very new then. A lot of people didn't have websites. A newsletter, which we're still running today. So if you would like to join us at our newsletter, please go to murdersquad.co.uk and join up. We frequently have letters which will give you information about events and new things that we're trying out, and things like the anthology, which we're very proud of. And I think, given that these are very different stories, that's one of the joys of working with Murder Squad. We're all very different authors. We had to take very different approaches to our writing. So it's an opportunity to dip in and find out about other writers. And since then, of course, we've been joined by Kate Ellis, who's here now, and Chris Sims, who we hope will join us later. And over that period of time, these mid-list authors who didn't have any budget, any marketing, anything to kind of boost them in their sales, have since, all of us have gained awards, have gained profile, and we're particularly proud that Anne Cleeves and Martin Edwards have both been awarded the highest accolade by the Crime Writers Association in the UK, which is the Diamond Dagger. So not bad for a bunch of mid-list authors, really.
No, you've been remarkable. I can certainly testify to the advantages of longevity in this business. This is our 32nd year at the Poison Pen, but I signed up for the Murder Squad newsletter when you guys started. And I've always followed along and been interested. You are very different authors, and you've pointed out the plight of the mid-list author. You really are trailblazers, because back in 1989, when I started, much more work was done by publishers across a much wider range of authors, and that has narrowed down today. People often ask me, how'd you know that was going to be a bestseller or whatever it is? And you don't have to read the tea leaves to see the amount of media and advertising that a publisher does pretty much tells you that this is how much they're throwing behind a book, and it becomes a somewhat self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that does leave everybody else needing to do a lot of the work that publishers once upon a time did. I think Robert Barnard said to me years ago that Christiana Brand would turn in a book, and then she would say grandly to her publisher, I'm done. And it's all over to you. But if you try that today, your publisher will certainly push back. And it'll be interesting. Sam Martin, my dear, you and I worked together now for years as your editor, as a colleague, as your bookseller, whatever it is. Tell us what you had to say in the introduction to this volume.
Well, thanks, Barbara. And I think I would like to echo what Margaret has said, that this collaboration has really been something fantastic in my life and my career. It's the combination of as you've said, the different approaches, the different styles, but also the shared vision and the mutual support, which is really important in the crime writing community. And I think it's a great feature of the writing community that crime writers, in my experience, you've mentioned Robert Barnard and people of that vintage, were great supporters of me when I was starting out. And I think that the willingness that I've found personally, and I know my friends tonight will agree, that the willingness of others to support fellow crime writers is really rather wonderful. In terms of what we're going to do as a group in those early days, because I'd already at that point edited a number of anthologies, the finger pointed at me to put together a collection of short stories, which we did in the very early days. I think within about 12 months of the squad being formed, we produced an anthology which had the stunningly original title of Murder Squad, and that was a collection of stories that we were proud of. It did well, and then we left it quite a number of years, and another book came out called Best Eaten Cold and Other Stories. Best Eaten Cold, by the way, was a story by Stuart Pawson, sadly no longer with us, but a terrific guy and a very witty and entertaining writer. And that yielded a shared short story dagger for both Cath and for Margaret, which was really rather wonderful. I think the only time that's ever happened, that the award has been shared, and it was not only shared between two Murder Squad friends, but between two people who contributed to our book. So that was really a dream come true for all of us, I think. Then a little later, Anne came up with a fascinating idea, writing stories connected with a set of photographs. There's a photographer called David Wilson, and the members of Murder Squad and a few other friends from outside the group collaborated in writing stories inspired by those photographs, and that was a book called Starlings and Other Stories, edited by Anne. And then, of course, to bring things up to date, we have Many Deadly Returns. Now, last year, of course, was our thank you, yes, a lovely cover, I think. We all really love it. We were hoping last year to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Murder Squad with a whole variety of events and trips and all sorts of things, but of course none of that was possible because of the pandemic. But undaunted, we had the idea putting together another book to celebrate the 21st anniversary. And so that was the concept of Many Deadly Returns. And because 21 is a special anniversary, we thought we would try to celebrate the whole journey that we'd undertaken together. So there are 3 stories by each of the 6 of us, the current members, but there's also a story by Charles, a story by John, and a story by Stuart, because we wanted to honour the contribution they had made to the group over the years, which was a very significant one, I must say. So that's the concept of the book: 21 stories to celebrate 21 years of considerable fun, as well as literary pleasures of one kind or another. And whether we'll manage another 21 years together remains to be seen, but certainly the journey so far has been fantastic, and it's been a great pleasure not only to edit some of the anthologies, but also to watch the development of my friends and colleagues as writers themselves, and to have that vicarious pleasure that you get when you see good people achieving success.
Well, my keen mathematical skills, for which I am notorious for lacking, tells me that each of you wrote 3 stories, which took us to 18. So you must have invited 3 other stories in. So one was John Baker, one is Stuart Fawson, and who's your third one?
Chas Brenchley, the other founder member,
Right.
who is, as Margaret mentioned, now living in the States, but writing fantasy fiction very successfully.
So Anne, yours is the opening story here called Wild Swimming. And I can't give it away, but I have to say that it's an amazing use of the pandemic in order to write this. I suppose Vera was a natural to kick this off. Did this idea, I love the idea. Did you just, where'd it come from? I know it's a dumb question, but
I live right on the coast, and wild swimming has become a huge thing. Sea swimming in the cold, throughout the winter has become a big thing here. I think especially during COVID, people wanting to get out and finding that swimming in very cold water has been good for their mental health. So that just triggered the story, really, going and watching these crazy people running into the sea across the frosty beach, and then thinking about somebody who might not survive that, and where that might lead to. So that's how the story started. And so yes, COVID does play a part in that.
When you have such a short space, you have to focus really on the plot more than anything else, although you want to sketch character, but you have to bring it to resolution in a pretty compressed time.
Yeah, it's one moment in time, isn't it, I think? And so I think short story writing is very difficult, and I do admire people who do it well, like Cath and Margaret, who've both won daggers for it. But they're fun to do, and I enjoy. It's a chance to do something very different, I think. So Wild Swimming is told from a different perspective. It's not told by the detective, and Vera makes the very late appearance in it. So yeah, quite a different way of working.
I thought your second story, The Queen of Mystery, was truly fabulous, somewhat terrifying. and of course, it's a bit of a plug for Malice Domestic, right? Which is
that was a commission piece for Radio 4, and they did a whole series of stories around book festivals, and so that was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one for the diva writers who turn up at these book festivals and want everyone to love them.
Well, I certainly hope it wasn't a biographical.
Oh, absolutely not. No, it wasn't based on anybody at all. No, nobody specific at all.
And I don't think you could get further away from diva when it comes to Anne.
No. Absolutely true. I mean, it's really a shame we can't talk about the whole story, but I think we have to observe the spoiler, silence, and not to ruin the book. I have to say that this book is really, I can't recommend it enough as escape reading for the holidays. You can just dip in and have a moment or two relieve stress, get away from your family.
Yeah.
And, you
And
know,
we hope that it'll bring people perhaps to some of the novels as well, because there are people especially who aren't, or maybe haven't been published in the US yet, but so I hope it'll be a way of American readers to find other authors that might be new to them.
So Kate Ellis, you and I have not met, but I've read many of your books. I particularly liked your archaeological series with Wesley Peterson.
Oh, thank you.
Well, you're entirely welcome. And I'm sorry that it's never been easy to get your books here in the United States, but
No,
I know that you
they're-
published.
Yeah, I think they're increasingly available.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
tell us about your stories. Pick
well,
all three or just one, whatever you want to do.
I've done three, like everyone else. The Fox and the Hens was inspired when my husband and me went to a hotel attached to a vineyard in Yorkshire. Now, if you know Yorkshire, it's not really vineyard climate, but we're staying in this self-catering apartment. And in one of the other apartments, there was a hen party going on all night with raucous music and that. I thought, I'm going to get a short story out of this. So that's The Fox and the Hens. And of course, the hens are the ladies of the hen party. My other one is My Oleander. I've wanted to write a story about oleander, the plant, for quite some time, since I went to Italy and was told by a tour guide that it's highly poisonous. Every single piece of the plant is highly poisonous. And I think only goats can survive it. So that was My Oleander. And the other one was set in my native Liverpool. That's Confessions of Edward Prime. And that's a man who loves confessing to lots of different murders. Of course, he didn't do any of them. He just wants attention and he goes into the police station to confess. So that's the starting point to that. I love writing short stories. It gives you a chance to experiment. And, you know, I've done a very long running series. I've done a trilogy set after the First World War and a spooky series set in York. But short stories just make you get you out of your comfort zone. And you can
So is oleander a common plant in the UK?
No, but this was in Italy, in warmer climates.
Well, we use it for hedging here. I mean, we are surrounded by oleander. If you
Yeah.
know, we had any murderous people, we have new puppies, and I had to go out and make sure that they can actually reach the oleander.
It's highly poisonous.
There are other plants, geranium, strangely enough, are toxic to puppies, but oleander, you can even see it as hedging on highways. It's you know, the way you guys have hedgerows, we have oleander rows. So
Yes,
I'm hoping that your story will not inspire mass murder.
I know. It's a very
across
beautiful
the United States. It'd be terrible. So Cath, tell us about your stories.
Oh, well, I mean, like Kate, I love the opportunity to experiment. And I think when I'm writing short stories, that's probably the most liberating experience of writing for me, because I don't really plan any, I just set off. It's usually just 2 or 3 words that inspires the rest of the story, or the first sentence. And I think that ability to try all sorts of things that I wouldn't do in my novels is reflected in the stories I've got in this anthology. So one is historical. It's set back in the sort of Industrial Revolution, when all the mill workers in our northern towns would have the same week off work called the Wakes Week or the Holiday Week. And they would all go to the coast for their holiday together, and often stay in the same streets together in Blackpool or these other seaside towns. And so that for me was a departure to write about a historical setting and a sort of, it's called Two Birds, but I can't really say much more than that without giving anything away. And a complete contrast to that was writing something set slightly in the future, in a sort of world devastated by climate change, when the Yorkshire Dales has become the Yorkshire Desert and is plagued by snowstorms. And that's a story about survival and greed. And again, it was just a pleasure for me to just write two characters and their sort of struggle, if you like, who outwits who. But I think one thing I've noticed about my short stories is, unlike my novels, they almost always focus on the killers. Whereas my novels will usually be about people who've been the victims of crime, or bystanders or relatives or bereaved people or detectives. My short stories are a place where I can go somewhere quite dark, and I know I don't have to stay there very long. I don't have to stay with these characters for like 250 pages. So my third story is a contemporary story, and it's really about, I suppose it touches on issues like knife crime and domestic violence and poverty and inequality. But it's basically just two young men who are in a prison cell playing a game of, you know, what would you pick? Chicken or roast beef, Stormzy or Skepta, you know, and they go through all these different, and gradually the story of how they came to be in that cell emerges through the story. So I just love doing it, and it was great fun to have the chance to do it with all my Murder Squad pals and get it out this year. So that's been great.
Margaret, how about you?
Well, Big End Blues is actually the one that featured in that first collection. So that's the one that kind of harks back to the old days. And I have very vivid dreams, and in particular, very vivid nightmares. And I can wake up gasping and kind of almost jumping out of bed to escape from the danger. So that one was actually triggered by a nightmare in which my car had broken down in a very dark, very lonely lane. And the last memory I had just before I woke up was of a very large, very angry man standing over me with a monkey wrench about to strike. And I woke up from that, and the story came out of that. And actually, it's quite a whimsical story, and unlike, as people have been saying here earlier, you know, it's often quite unlike the normal tone of their work, and in this case, this was as well. The longest story, which is still live, was actually inspired by a memoir which was written by Jean-Dominique Bauby, who was the editor of Elle magazine, editor-in-chief of Elle magazine in Paris. And in 1995, he was driving his car. He had a major stroke, which effectively severed the spinal cord. You know, he wasn't able to have any sensation and wasn't able to control any functions from the neck down. In fact, he could only control one eyelid. He could blink. And from that starting point, he dictated a novel. So someone would be dictating an alphabet to him, and when he blinked, that meant that he wanted that particular letter. So he dictated an entire memoir over 10 months, blink by blink. And it was full of joy and gratitude and hope. It was published in 1997, and he died 2 days later. And it was just such an inspirational story that I took it and gave it a much darker twist, I have to admit. But it was inspired by that man's optimism and hope and compassion for others. So that really is the one that moved me, and it was something I had to write because of the inspiration of that original story. Read the Label, it originates in something I just jotted down years ago, because I do a lot of research and I do a lot of reading around psychology and how the brain works and so on. And there are two little almond-shaped objects either side of the brain called the amygdala, which control emotions and emotional responses. And I learned that we actually make our minds up about people that we meet within 1/10 of a second. And it's all down to the amygdala and our response to that emotional and kind of visual stimulus. But what makes it terrifying is that our conscious brains, our reasoning brains, actually will then try to justify that decision. So if we decide someone is trustworthy and pleasant and safe, if they start acting out of character, our brain tries to explain that, which is why people become prey to scammers and to, and in fact, to dangerous men, dangerous people in general, but often dangerous men, people like Ted Bundy. And another little twist in the story is that psychopaths like Ted Bundy actually have very little activity in the amygdala. They just don't have the emotional responses. And that gives them free rein to do the things that any other person would be terrified to do because they'd be terrified of getting caught. They just don't feel that anxiety and that danger. So I wanted to put something down about that. It's quite a creepy story, really.
So that, that's an interesting thought, because people often ask, why do they like the books they like? Or, how do we pick books that we recommend to people? And I'm always saying that it's voice, because, and as an editor, I used to say that I can help you fix almost anything in your book, but if you're boring, there's really nothing I can do about it. But what is boring? How do you define that? So I'm wondering, does this amygdala thing, do you think that it applies to writing as well as to, direct social contact? Do readers respond through their amygdala to the voices that you create?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I suppose it is the amygdala that responds, but I suppose because we are doing a conscious thing in reading, and it's a very active process, I think. I think we respond differently when we have to use that kind of decoding system. Effectively, when we read, we are decoding. So there's more of the sort of front brain activity going on. But I still think we have a very strong emotional response to the characters. I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced that, where we just can't bear a particular character, or we want them to get their comeuppance, or we really root for a particular character. But I think that's probably a far more conscious response to, I suppose, the manipulation, in a sense, that the author is using in sort of applying their skills of writing.
This is really fascinating. I'm going to have to think about that. Martin, I'm coming to you, but I wanted to ask Anne, since Anne, you've had your books now interpreted by 3 different actors. We have, Vera, and then we have Shetland, and now we've got your wonderful series set in Devon. Do you think people respond to the actors in the same way she's talking about? Some people just loathe them and other people really like them?
I think so. I think that Brenda Blethyn as Vera has captured the imagination of people all over the world. I think that show has been sold to more than 200 territories. So wherever you are in the world, you're at some strange hour of the day or night, you're likely to catch it on a streaming service. And I think it is that character of Brenda as Vera that people have taken to. A strong woman of a certain age who's witty and authoritative and doesn't care what she looks like, I think is very appealing to a lot of people. And the same with Dougie Henshaw as Jimmy Perez. There's a kind of kindness at his heart, I think, that people have liked. And then Ben Aldridge is just very easy on the eye.
He has an interesting role, I think, as Matthew Finn. I mean, not an easy one to navigate. Yeah, but now I'm also wondering if people, and I could say this would be true of me, because I'd only read like 1 Vera or 2, because, I just can't get to everything. And then after I watched the television, now I have a whole different reaction to reading the books. So it's kind of a two-way thing, isn't it?
I think so. And I think Ben Aldridge's portrayal of Matthew is especially interesting because he has relatively recently come out as gay, and he did grow up with very restrictive, very religious parents. So he will say that actually acting that role in that way was quite cathartic for him, because it was almost reliving his own relationship with his relatives too.
Yeah, that explains why his emotions ring so true. I mean, I thought it's really moving. And I love the way that his husband stood up to him and said, you know, you have to work through the fear.
Yeah,
I
I
like
think
that
so.
very, very much. And I didn't realize that it was something in himself that he was touching. So welcome, Chris Sims. It's so nice to see you. I'm sorry that we've proceeded without you.
No, sorry, that's my fault. I've got a shaky internet connection today, and so if I drop out, my apologies. But that seems to be the problem going on at the moment.
Well, quickly, while we have you, since I was actually getting to Martin, who is the editor, is like the super guru of this whole thing. While we have you, why don't you tell us about your 3 stories before we might lose you?
Okay, yes. Well, the one that's brand new for the anthology is a story about it's very much kind of an issue in the news with people crossing the English Channel as migrants or refugees. So I had an idea of a fairly sort of unpleasant character in England and sort of moaning about these sort of issues, and then being blown out to sea on a lilo and coming across a group of refugees, and then there then follows a kind of incident. So that was the basis of the brand new story for the anthology. Then the other one, one of the other ones is called Gaffed, which is almost like a play, really. It just takes place in one room with 2 characters and their interactions as they go on. So you kind of know someone's going to come to a sticky end, but you don't know which person, because they're both equally shady in their own ways. And then the third one was a story set on a local amenity tip, sort of recycling centre, and it just concerns a rather fixated elderly manager of the site who observes 2 people turning up at regular times towards the end of the day when the site is quiet and depositing mysterious packages into the recycling or the container that actually goes off for incineration. So Sinister is afoot and takes action, and that will fairly kind of gruesome incident. So those are my 3 stories for the anthology.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you were able to join us. Now, Martin, you know, you just cracked me up. You gave up your law practice and you said you were going to retire, and you have worked harder and done more in the time since you left your
Yes.
career in Liverpool as a solicitor. Than, I mean, you're just a raging editor and anthologist. What is it that draws you to do this?
Well, not so much raging as obsessive, I guess, Barbara. and yeah, I love it. I dreamed as a small boy. I've often told this story of how I fell in love with detective fiction at a very young age, eight years old, and also had the idea not only to be a fan but to write my own stories, and that dream is what drove me on, and everything else, including the law, which I've enjoyed generally, and in fact I still am a very, very part-time lawyer, but everything else work-wise has been subordinate to pursuing that dream, and I've been lucky that I've been able to hang on in the writing game. It's not been a smooth ride all the time, as it isn't for most writers and most of the members of Nerd Squad. I think would agree, but that love of the genre has kept me going, and also from a writing point of view, the wish to get better, to keep improving. I think that's really, really important, to stay fresh and try different things, get out of the comfort zone. I think is really important, and I've been lucky that that things have gone really well in recent years, and there are a whole range of reasons for that. The support of good friends such as Murder Squad, the support of good editors and booksellers such as you, Barbara, and the support of a good agent, and also occasionally you do need luck. You do need a lucky break, and and I've had some of those too. So it's been fortunate, and I just hope to make the most of it whilst the wheel of fashion has moved around in my direction.
Well, luck only really comes into play if you've done the preparation necessary to take advantage of it.
Yeah, well, of course, one of the stories in the book, I do find the idea of luck very interesting, and there is a story called Lucky Liam, which is about someone who appears to be very fortunate in life, and that was a story I was invited to write. A short story for an anthology set around bookshops, and I didn't really have the fully formed idea. I had the character, and then I visited Hartlepool in the northeast, and all of a sudden I pictured an old-fashioned second-hand bookshop sort of place I love to visit. There wasn't one actually there in Hartlepool, but I invented one, and the whole story came together, and that was a lot of fun to write. The story, The Other Life, that came from a conversation I had with a very good friend of mine. She told me that a friend of hers had invited her to go to one of these slightly unusual spiritualist churches. She found the whole experience rather strange and weird. She told me about it. Oh, that would be a great way into a mystery story. And then the third story in the anthology, a story called Bad Friday. I was down in London doing a couple of book events down in London, and I live, of course, as we all do, in the north of England. So I was travelling back on the train from London Euston up to the northwest, roughly a 2-hour journey, and there was a very loud young person sitting in the carriage, and one by one, all the other passengers in the carriage melted away, found seats elsewhere in other carriages, because she really was pretty horrible things she was saying on the phone. But there was this kind of weird hypnotic spell that this sequence of phone calls, when she would ring one person and say one thing, and then ring another person and tell them something different about the same instant. And I was listening to this because there was no avoiding it, especially she had a very, very loud voice indeed, and she was screeching it at certain points. It was quite extraordinary, until there were only, I think, about 3 or 4 of us left in the carriage. And in many ways, it was agonizing to listen to, and quite horrible in some ways. But I thought, well, in one respect, it's been a terrible journey, but in another respect, there must be a short story in this sequence of phone calls. So although the phone calls in the story, of course, are totally different, the idea sprang from that bizarre experience of listening to this woman really spinning a load of lies and invective and poisoning her friends against each other. It was utterly memorable. I hope never to repeat the experience, but it certainly gave me a story that was a lot of fun to write.
I have sworn that if they ever enable phones on airplanes, I'm never flying again. I'm done if it happens.
It was extreme.
So which of you selected the story by your deceased member, Mr. Baker, and no, Mr. Pawson, sorry.
Yes.
And did Mr. Baker pick his own? How'd that work?
I think I had a look at the stories we'd already had in previous anthologies by John and Stuart, and we were sort of thinking about the sort of length we wanted and the sort of topic and so on. So I suggested to John and to Stuart's wife, Doreen, which stories we'd like to include if they were happy to do that, and they were fine with those selections. Yeah.
Oh, great.
And I picked Chaz's, I think, because he used to live up here in the Northeast, and I'd remembered a particular story that he'd written that I thought was very powerful. When he was writer in residence down in Sunderland, he was working in quite a deprived bit of Sunderland, right on the river, on the weir. And this story had stuck in my head, so I asked him if we could use that.
So your editor didn't rule with an iron hand. He was collaborative over here, Martin.
Well, it's with any anthologies, as you well know, Barbara, it's about getting the blend. And I think it is, we've talked about diversity and range already in the group, and it is important to have a good mix. So with an anthology, nobody, I think, whoever reads a book of 21 stories will like every single story to an equal extent. But what you hope is that if you have a lot of readers, that amongst that readership, there will be some who will particularly love this story or that story. And so the book, if it is wide-ranging enough in styles and content and type of story, that was really the aim of putting it together in this way, to try and cover as many different angles as we could do with the material available. So to try to offer, as far as you can do, realistically, something for everyone. That was the idea.
And I think that another aspect of that is that stories that I've read in the past, which I couldn't get into, if you're in the right mood or the right place in your life, they suddenly speak to you, don't they?
Yeah.
And having that variety really does help.
That's right. And there's a story which I don't think we have mentioned, Winter's Tale by Anne, which she wrote for an anthology I edited almost 30 years ago, called Northern Blood, and that one has stayed in my mind all that time. It's one I really enjoyed at the time, so I was very pleased that she was happy for us to include that one. So it's having that range and as I say, creating different kinds of emotional impact with the different styles of story, I think is really important. So you'll get humour, you'll get pathos, you'll get grief, rage, or fear, whatever it may be. But that range is really important in an anthology. And we hope it's a book that people will dip into and keep dipping into and find things, as Anne said earlier, maybe by authors who are unfamiliar to them, or maybe unfamiliar things by authors who are familiar to them, and find that all the more pleasurable.
Well, it's wonderful for authors that get to explore new things, wonderful for readers, as you point out, to get to meet things. Before we end, since some of you may be less familiar with some of our audience at the Poison Pen or whoever's, I mean, one of the fascinating things about the pandemic is I thought I knew who our customers were, and now they are totally international. We did an event for an Icelandic author called Ursa Sigurdsdóttir, and I did it as a favor to Karen Slaughter, who's a fan of Ursa's, and I will do anything for Karen. And we had almost 10,000 people watch it, and only 180 of them lived in the United States. I mean, I just was blown away by that. And so now we're going to do an event for the First Lady of Iceland on February 18th or 19th that Ursa is going to be the speaker of. And one of the things that's so wonderful about Zoom is that we can do this international thing that we never would have thought about before. But I would love it if each of you would tell us briefly about your work that may not be familiar to US readers. So Chris, since you're the shaky internet connection, why don't you tell us what you're working on in case we lose you?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, I have a core series of detective novels, of which there are 9 of those now. They all feature a detective inspector just to police the equivalent of their murder squad, I suppose, called D.I. John Spicer. And he's quite a kind of rough and ready character, tends to be quite physical, sort of uses his fists before his brain, that kind of thing. And so is always getting into trouble with his superior officers. So that's my kind of core series that's run along for many years now, but I've written quite a few books on the side as well, few standalone novels, and I've actually got a standalone out for consideration. A few editors down in London. So this is a kind of, you heard it here first, actually, because it's a standalone psychological thriller with the provisional title of The Midnight Rambler, and it's about a person, obviously, who kind of stalks around in the small hours of the night, seeking victims and getting up to no good. So yeah, I'm at that horrible stage where it's kind of like waiting for exam results to come back. I don't know how it's going to go down with the editors it's with at the moment, but you never know. As Martin was saying, there's a lot of luck involved in this game, and if I'm lucky, one of those editors will take and it might get progressed. So we shall see. But that's kind of me in a nutshell.
It's wonderful. I should point out to our audience that if the books you're looking for by these authors aren't available in your local bookstore, you can order them from amazon.co.uk, because if there's no US publisher, there's no prohibition about bringing in a book. So, take advantage of that. Kate, what are you up to?
Well, I've done 25 novels in the Wesley Peterson series. That Wesley is a detective inspector, but he also has a degree in archaeology, and his best friend is a county archaeologist. So there's always a historical mystery going on in the background and a contemporary murder case as well. I've just delivered the 26th Wesley. And my latest one's called The Stone Chamber, and the next one is called Serpent's Point. I've also done 5 in the Joe Plantagenet series. That's quite a spooky series set in York, which is one of England's most haunted cities. I've also done a trilogy set in the aftermath of the First World War that features Detective Inspector Albert Lincoln from Scotland Yard, who was injured in the war. And he goes up north. I wanted to set that up north where I live. He goes up north to solve very challenging cases. And there's a story arc as well about his personal life. So I've written rather a lot, and I might, I don't know how much to say about this. I might be also doing a standalone set in North Wales with a sort of middle-aged woman detective.
Well, that's very exciting. And the good news is that apparently British TV producers are in love with whales. Reese Bowen was telling me that a series that she wrote some time ago and has been optioned for television, and it didn't take off originally because they didn't like the fact that Wales was so old-fashioned, but now they've decided to make it historical, so it's okay to write about a kind of cozy version of Wales.
So my father's family,
it's such a beautiful part of but so's the north of England, and I think it's wonderful. Of course, the Shetland are, who could resist that? And I have to say, Anne, that you've been well served by drones, because some of the scenery, I particularly thought about that watching The Long Call. There's no way that photography could have worked before drones.
No, drones are very much cheaper, which is why you see them in everything now.
Right. So how about you, Cath? What are you working on?
I've been writing a series of mainly standalone novels for quite a long time now, after doing a Private Eye series called the Sal Kilkenny series and Blue Murder Stories, which tie into my TV series, which some of your readers may have seen on US TV. So my standalone novels, they all tend to look at people who are affected by crime and whose lives are suddenly torn apart by killings. And they often ask questions like, what would you do in this situation? How would you get through this situation? How would you navigate suddenly being, sort of having somebody taken away from you? The most recent of those, which is out in hardback at the moment, I actually moved out of my comfort zone of writing about the city of Manchester and the urban setting, and did a story that's more or less a sort of chase come hunt set in the Peak District of Derbyshire. And so it was very nice during lockdown, when I couldn't go out walking in the hills, to actually be writing a story set in the hills. So I was there vicariously and escaping all the grim news with this thriller that I was writing about a little girl being abducted by her estranged father and the characters she meets on this madcap journey. So I'm quite interested in continuing to write more rural settings, and that's where I'm up to.
Well, the rural settings are fascinating to Americans. We lost Margaret. There she comes back again. I was thinking about the late Reginald Hill and his wonderful books set in Yorkshire and also in the Lake District. And Mark and I have worked on a series together set in the Lake District, and finally, thank God, there's a new one that's going to come out. So I'm excited about that. Right, Ian, we probably know what you're working on, but why don't you refresh us?
Yeah, the most recent book out is a new Matthew Venn called The Heron's Cry, and there will be a new Vera out in next year, next September. So I'm just at the editing stage of that, copy editing and then page proof, but that's pretty well done. And I'm thinking already about ideas for a new Matthew Venn, so there will be a third North Devon book out sometime soon.
Well, that's exciting. Last time you were at the Poison Pen, you did let us know that the Shetland series was going to continue without your participation. In other words, they're now their characters and they can run with them and do things. Is that hard to let go?
No, not at all. I'd written all that I wanted to say about Shetland. I still love it, and I still go back. I'll be there at the beginning of next month, opening a new library in Lerwick. But no, I'd finished writing about Jimmy Perez. I'd done with him, so I'm very happy for the television to carry on. And there will be this series that's being broadcast now, and at least one more.
I had that same conversation with Michael Conley on Friday. He is stepping away from Bosch and going back to books. And, you know, I can see why that would be a good thing to do, to allow you to do other work, because it's so consuming. Margaret, what are you up to?
Well, I've had quite a few of my psychological standalones and duology as well published in the United States in the past. And those have recently been re-released in mainly digital. I'm afraid it is on Amazon. But I also had 2 new novels published last year. One was a completion of a trilogy set in Liverpool, which is the Rickman books. And one was a completely new, the start of a new series, I hope. I've begun working on the outline for that now, with a detective constable and a psychoanalyst, actually, who is her foil and fills in some of the gaps in her knowledge and gets in sort of embroiled in some of the work that she does. So that one's Before He Kills Again, and the one which is the Rickman, part of the Rickman series, which I've wanted to complete for many years and actually had completed, but couldn't find a publisher. So that's now found a publisher. That's called Don't Scream.
Wonderful. Martin, I know the answer to your question, but well, actually you keep surprising me with side projects that I didn't anticipate. So tell us about Rachel Sabernack and also about the Lake District.
Well, Rachel Sabernack, Maudmain Hall came out a little while ago. The 3rd book, Blackstone Fell, will be published next year. The Lake District, the new one, was published in Britain this year, but isn't going to be published in the States until next summer, but it'll be under a new title. So that's with new artwork and so on. So that will be an interesting experience. And this year happens to be the 30th anniversary of my first novel coming out. So the ebook publishers have relaunched that series with new artwork and introductions by the likes of Anne and Margaret and others. So that's been exciting too. I'm about to begin the 4th Rachel Savnate book set in the 1930s. That will be called Sepulchre Street. But my next publication will be non-fiction. HarperCollins in May will be publishing The Life of Crime, which is my history of crime fiction, which is one of those mega projects which is either admirably bold and ambitious or extremely foolhardy. So time will tell what the verdict is on that one. But that's a big book, and it's been a number of years in the making. So I'm relieved to see that it's finally going to come out next May.
So you not only inherited Harry Keating's mantle at the Detection Club, but you've also inherited his mantle as a scholar and publisher of the history of crime fiction. So I'm so glad that you're going to need to groom somebody to take over when you die of exhaustion. So this has really been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, all of you. Let me remind our viewers that you can go to murdersquad.co.uk and discover more about this group of writers and sign up for their newsletter, which I absolutely love. And comes out, how often do you publish it?
It's every couple of months at the moment.
Good. So you can keep current on all these different projects and explore parts of England that, you know, not every mystery needs to be set in London. We say that here in the States about, you know, why is everything New York or Los Angeles? And I'm really pleased that authors like C.J. Boxa brought us Wyoming, for example, or, you know, there's so much to explore besides just these urban centers. Crime fiction was really very urban for a while. And then there's the Agatha Christie Village thing and, you know, foreign, but why not explore your own country is a mantle that we live by here. Anyway, happy holidays to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us.